My name is David. I'm an engineer, married to Sarah for 15 years, and father to Thomas, now 9 years old. When people ask me about being a father to an autistic child, I always say that this journey has completely transformed me as a man, as a father, and as a human being. But it wasn't easy to get here. I'm going to share our story with you, the challenges we faced, the mistakes I made, and most importantly, the incredible discoveries we made along the way. Maybe our experience can help other families going through something similar. It all started when Thomas was 2.5. I was that typical dad who thought he understood everything, especially because I've always been very rational, a real problem solver. But Thomas was showing me that some problems can't be solved with spreadsheets and schedules. The first signs were subtle, at least to me. Sarah had been talking for months about how something was different. Thomas wouldn't respond when we called his name, seemed to always be in his own world, as we used to say. He loved organizing his toy cars in perfect rows and would get extremely upset if anyone moved them. In my ignorance, I thought this was just smart boy stuff. He's detail-oriented, like his dad, I'd say proudly. He's gonna be an engineer, too. Ironic, right? I was so focused on seeing Thomas through my own filters that I couldn't see who he really was. The first big fight with Sarah was when she suggested we see a specialist pediatrician. There's nothing wrong with our son, I said, and I still remember the defensive tone in my voice. He's just different. Different isn't broken. Funny how sometimes we say the right thing for the wrong reasons, huh? Different really isn't broken. But I was using that phrase to run from reality, not embrace it. Thomas wasn't talking. At 3 years old, he still wasn't forming sentences, barely babbled a few words. And when he did speak, it was always the same words, in the same order, like a broken record. I made up excuses. Einstein was a late talker too. Boys develop slower, anyway. He's observing the world before interacting. But deep down, way deep down, I knew Sarah was right. There were nights when I'd lie awake watching Thomas sleep, and a strange anxiety would take over my chest. It wasn't fear of autism. Actually, I didn't really know what autism was back then. It was fear of the unknown, fear of not knowing how to be a father to a child I couldn't understand. It took us almost a year to get to Dr. Helen's office, a pediatric neurologist specializing in child development. A year of arguments, of me dragging my feet, of Sarah crying in secret, of growing tension between us. I remember that on the day of the appointment, I was more nervous than I'd ever been in my life. Worse than my wedding day. Worse than defending my master's thesis. My hands were sweating. My heart was racing. Thomas, of course, was oblivious to all this tension. He was playing on the office floor, lining up toys by color and size, completely absorbed in his activity. Dr. Helen was kind but direct. After almost 2 hours of observation, tests, and questions, she called us over to talk while Thomas continued playing. Thomas shows clear characteristics of autism spectrum disorder, she said calmly. It's important we start interventions as soon as possible." I heard the words, but it was like she was speaking a foreign language. My brain simply refused to process the information. I sat there, looking at her, trying to find a loophole, a possibility that she was wrong. "Are you sure?" was all I managed to ask. Sarah cried. I didn't cry there in the office, but when we got home, when I put Thomas to bed, and he looked at me with those bright, innocent eyes, I broke down. I cried like I hadn't cried since I was a kid. In the following weeks, I dove into Google like a desperate man. I read everything I could find about autism, from scientific articles to parent forums. And the more I read, the more confused and scared I became. The information was contradictory, some very technical, others very pessimistic. It was a dark period. I blamed myself for not noticing earlier, fought with Sarah over silly things, and worst of all, I started treating Thomas like he was fragile, like he would break at any moment. I lost the natural ease with my own son. Dr. Helen referred us to a multidisciplinary team: speech therapist, psychologist, occupational therapist. I thought it would be like taking the car to the shop, identify the problem, apply the fix, done. How naive I was. The first speech therapy session was a reality check. The therapist, Karen, explained that the process would be long, that each small advance would be a victory, that we'd need to have patience. "Patience isn't my strong suit," I confessed to her. "You're gonna have to learn," she replied with a smile. "Thomas is going to be your best teacher." And she was right, but at the time, I didn't understand what that meant. I had a very mechanical view of the process. I thought if we followed all the guidelines to a T, did all the exercises, applied all the techniques, Thomas would get better. A word that makes me cringe today. As if he were a problem to be solved, not a unique person to be understood. I remember one specific session where the psychologist asked me to play with Thomas using sensory toys. I was clearly uncomfortable, trying to do it right, following the instructions like they were a technical manual. Thomas looked at me, took my hand, and placed it on the texture of a soft ball. He smiled, a genuine and rare smile at the time. That's when I realized he didn't need me to be perfect. He just needed me to be present, to try to understand his world instead of forcing him to understand mine. One of the biggest difficulties at the beginning was communication. Thomas didn't talk, and when he tried to express himself, it was through gestures I didn't understand, or through behaviors I interpreted as tantrums. There was one day when he had a terrible meltdown at Target. I was shopping with him when suddenly he started screaming, throwing himself on the floor, hitting his head. People stared, some with pity, others with judgment. One lady even commented, "In my day, poorly behaved children got a spanking, and that was that." I felt lost, embarrassed, incompetent. I picked Thomas up, abandoned the shopping, and we left. In the car, while he calmed down in his car seat, I cried from frustration. I didn't know how to help my own son. It was Sarah who made me realize that wasn't a tantrum. It was communication. Thomas was trying to tell us that something was bothering him, that he was sensorily overwhelmed. The fluorescent lights, the sounds, the movement, it was all too much for him to process. From that day on, I started studying sensory processing. I learned that the world that's normal for me can be extremely intense for Thomas. The clothing tags that don't bother me can feel like sandpaper on his skin. The TV noise I barely notice can be deafening to his ears. I started observing everything differently. When we'd go to the park, and he'd be fascinated with the shadows of leaves moving on the ground. Instead of trying to get his attention to the playground equipment, I'd sit next to him and try to see what he was seeing. And you know what I discovered? It really was beautiful. The way light filtered through the leaves created mesmerizing patterns. The first daddy came when Thomas was 4.5. I was in my home office, working, when I heard a little voice calling me from the living room. I thought I'd imagined it, but then I heard it again. Daddy. I ran to the living room, and there he was, looking directly into my eyes. Something rare at the time, and repeating, "Daddy, Daddy." I cried in front of him. I couldn't control myself. I picked him up and kept repeating, "Yes, I'm Daddy, I'm Daddy," like a broken record. Sarah came running, thinking something had happened, and when I explained, she cried too. It might seem silly to someone who's never been through this, but that simple little word represented months of therapy, exercises, patience, love. It was proof that he knew who I was, that our connection existed even when he couldn't express it conventionally. From then on, words came slowly, like flowers blooming in spring. Each new word was a celebration in our house. Water, cookie, mommy, more. His vocabulary grew at its own pace, different from what the books said it should be, but steady. But maybe the biggest victory wasn't verbal. It was when he started seeking our affection spontaneously. Before, hugs were always our initiative, and he tolerated them more than actually wanted them. But one day, he was playing on the floor and simply came to me, climbed on the couch, and snuggled into my chest. I stayed motionless, afraid of breaking the moment. He stayed there for almost 20 minutes, just enjoying the contact. That's when I understood that his love had always been there. He just needed to find his own ways to show it. Not everything was roses, of course. Sensory meltdowns continued for a long time, and each one taught me something new about patience and creativity. There was a phase when Thomas couldn't get haircuts. The noise of the clippers, the feeling of hair falling on his neck, all of it would send him into total panic. We tried everything: specialized barbers, silent clippers, cutting at home. Nothing worked. Until one day, watching him play, I noticed he loved water. He was always fascinated by faucets, showers, the sensation of water running between his fingers. I had an idea. What if we cut his hair in the bath? I talked to Sarah. We researched how to do it, bought appropriate scissors. On the first try, it was a relative success. We managed to cut a little without total meltdown. The next times, we kept perfecting the technique. Today, 5 years later, Thomas gets haircuts normally at the salon, but he still prefers it with wet hair. This experience taught me something fundamental. Instead of trying to make Thomas adapt to the world, I could adapt the world for him. It was a revolutionary perspective change for me. Another memorable meltdown happened when he was 6. We needed to replace the refrigerator, and for Thomas, that white, noisy refrigerator was part of the natural order of the universe. When the delivery guys came to take the old one and install the new one, he went into despair. He screamed for 3 straight hours. It didn't matter what we did, he wouldn't calm down. I was at the limit of my patience when Sarah suggested we show him how the new fridge also made noise, so it could also store his favorite yogurts on the same shelf. It worked like magic. He touched the new fridge, listened to the noise, opened and closed the door. Several times, within 15 minutes, the meltdown was over. I learned that change itself wasn't the problem. It was the lack of preparation, the surprise, the break in routine without explanation. One of the most fascinating things about Thomas are his special interests. At 4 years old, he fell in love with maps. Not just any maps, specifically subway maps and public transportation systems. He memorized all the New York subway lines, then Chicago, then Boston, then several cities around the world. At first, I thought it was weird. Why doesn't he play with normal toys? I wondered. I tried several times to direct him to other activities, but he always went back to the maps. It was the occupational therapist who made me see this differently. His interest in maps isn't an obsession, she explained. It's a way of organizing and understanding the world, and it can be a bridge to other learning. She was right. We started using maps as an educational tool. Through them, Thomas learned colors, numbers, directions, geography. When we'd ride the subway in Manhattan, he'd be euphoric, explaining the stations, connections, distances. One day, we were lost in Midtown Manhattan, and I said, jokingly, "Thomas, do you know how to get to Times Square station?" He thought for a moment and started giving me directions. They were correct. My 5-year-old son had a mental map of the city better than my GPS. That's when I realized his special interests weren't limitations. They were superpowers. Each new interest opened a universe of possibilities for connection and learning. After maps came dinosaurs. For 2 years, our house became a paleontological museum. Thomas knew the scientific names of dozens of species, their characteristics, their geological periods. I, who always liked science, learned more about paleontology in those 2 years than in my entire life. Starting school was another challenging milestone. We visited several in our Connecticut school district, explained the situation, heard polite responses that hid resistance. We finally found Riverside Elementary School, where the educational coordinator, Mrs. Anderson, received us differently. She didn't talk about the challenges Thomas would be for the school, but about the challenges the school would need to overcome to accommodate him properly. Every child has the right to learn, she said. Our job is to figure out how each one learns best. Even so, the first months were turbulent. Thomas had difficulty with the school routine, with recess noise, with activity changes. I got several calls from school reporting meltdowns, and each call was like a stab to the chest. I felt like a failure as a father. I'd see other parents dropping their kids off at school naturally, while I went to work, always worried, always expecting the phone to ring. That's when I met Mike, Tyler's dad, who's also autistic but was in the next grade up. He told me something I'll never forget. At first, I thought I needed to prepare Tyler for the world. Then I understood I also needed to prepare the world for Tyler. We started working more closely with the school. I participated in educational meetings, helped develop strategies, shared information about how Thomas functioned at home. Gradually, the school adapted, and Thomas did too. The turning point was when the teacher discovered he loved being the helper responsible for organizing the class materials. It was a function that perfectly matched his need for order and gave him an important role in the group. One of the most important discoveries was understanding how Thomas processes sensory information. This completely changed how we lived as a family. I discovered he's hypersensitive to some stimuli and hyposensitive to others. Light touch bothers him, but he loves deep pressure. Tight hugs calm him, while gentle caresses irritate him. High-pitched sounds distress him, but he's calmed by white noise. We started adapting our Connecticut home. We bought noise-canceling headphones for very loud situations. We created a sensory corner in his room with weighted pillows, textured toys, a tent where he can retreat when he's overwhelmed. The most significant change was in our bedtime routine. Thomas always had trouble falling asleep. We discovered that a sensory routine before bed worked wonders. Warm bath, pressure massage on his arms and legs, nature sounds in the background, and always the same sequence. Today, he sleeps through the night, something that didn't happen before he was 5. And when I wake up in the middle of the night and go check on him, seeing him sleeping peacefully, I feel enormous gratitude for having learned to decode his needs. One of the deepest discoveries was learning that communication goes far beyond words. Thomas taught me an entire language of gestures, expressions, behaviors that speak volumes about his feelings and needs. When he lines up toys in a very specific way, it's not OCD, it's him creating order in a world that often seems chaotic to him. When he avoids eye contact, it's not disinterest, it's sensory protection. When he flaps his hands, it's not purposeless agitation, it's self-regulation. I learned to listen to these signals and respond appropriately. And the most incredible thing is that the more I learned his language, the more he opened up to learning mine. Today, we have entire conversations just with looks. He knows when I'm worried because I unconsciously drum my fingers. We've developed a communicative intimacy that goes far beyond the conventional. Thomas's communication evolution was like watching a flower open in slow motion. Each petal was a new skill, a new form of connection. After the first words came the phase of scripted phrases. He'd repeat things he heard on TV, cartoon dialogues, phrases he heard from us. At first, I didn't understand the function of this. It seemed like he was talking, but wasn't really communicating. The speech therapist explained that this was a normal phase for many autistic children. They use echolalia, repeating ready-made phrases as a way to process language and eventually begin adapting these phrases for their own needs. And that's exactly what happened. At 6 years old, Thomas started modifying the phrases he repeated. If, before he said, "Want some water?" with the same intonation he heard from us. Later, he began saying, "Thomas wants water," when he was thirsty. The first time he said, "Daddy, Thomas is sad," was an incredible milestone. Not just because he was forming his own sentences, but because he was identifying and naming an emotion. For a child who previously couldn't express discomfort, being able to say he was sad was revolutionary. Today, at 9 years old, Thomas speaks in complex sentences, asks questions, tells about his day at school, expresses preferences. His communication is still different, sometimes very literal, sometimes repetitive, but it's genuine and effective. Over these years, I've collected magical moments with Thomas that showed me our connection didn't depend on him being neurotypical. One of these moments happened when he was 7. We were in the backyard of our Connecticut house, me working in the garden, him playing with dirt. Suddenly, he brought a worm in his hand and said, "Daddy, she's important." I asked why. "She makes the soil good for plants, like Daddy makes our house good for the family." I was speechless. That simple and profound analogy showed me that he not only observes the world differently, but also makes connections that are often more poetic and true than ours. Another special memory is when I discovered he loves classical music. One afternoon, when I was listening to Bach while working, I noticed he had stopped playing and was just listening, completely absorbed. Since then, our Sunday morning ritual is listening to classical music together. He already has his favorite pieces and sometimes conducts the orchestra with precise and expressive movements. In these moments, I feel a connection with him that's different from anything I've ever experienced. It's communication that goes beyond words, a harmony that's independent of neurotypicality. This journey completely changed my definition of success and happiness. Before, I had a very limited idea of what a successful child should be like. Good grades, lots of friends, social ease, standing out in sports, the complete popular kid package. Thomas taught me that success can be managing to tie your own shoes at 8 years old. It can be making eye contact during an entire conversation. It can be trying a new food after months of gradual introductions. I remember a birthday party when he was 7. It was for a classmate, and I was anxious about how he'd behave. Throughout the party, Thomas stayed in the corner, watching the other kids play, fidgeting with a fidget spinner he always carries. At the end, when we left, he said, "Daddy, party was fun." I asked what had been fun, since he'd barely interacted with the other children. I liked watching friends be happy, and cake was yummy. In that moment, I understood he had enjoyed the party his way. He didn't need to be in the center of the action to have a positive experience. His way of having fun was different, but no less valid. Being Thomas's father taught me things about fatherhood I never imagined I'd need to learn. The main one was about real presence versus physical presence. Before, I thought being a good father was working hard to provide financial comfort, taking him on weekend outings, helping with homework. Important things, but not sufficient for Thomas. He needed me to really pay attention to him, to notice when he was overwhelmed before the meltdown happened, to understand his nonverbal needs, to celebrate his unique achievements instead of comparing them to typical developmental milestones. I learned to read the signs. When he started repetitively flapping his hands, it meant anxiety. When he made back and forth movements with his body, he was self-regulating. When he avoided eye contact more than usual, he needed sensory space. This attention to detail made me more observant with everyone around me. I started noticing things about Sarah I'd never perceived, subtle signs of tiredness or worry. I became a better husband, too. One of the hardest parts of this journey was dealing with judgment and ignorance from other people. From that lady at Target to well-meaning but misguided comments from family and friends. He'll grow out of it, some would say. It's just lack of discipline, others suggested. You should be firmer with him. Each comment was like a punch to the gut, especially because they came from people I loved and respected. I learned that social education is part of the package, not out of obligation, but out of necessity. The more people understand autism, the better the world becomes for Thomas and other children like him. I started explaining patiently whenever an opportunity arose. At school, in our community, with extended family, Thomas is autistic, which means he processes the world differently. It's not a disease, it's a neurological condition. He's intelligent, loving, and has his own ways of showing it. There was resistance, of course. My dad, especially, took a while to accept. In my day, kids like that got some tough love and learned to behave, he'd say. But gradually, seeing how Thomas responded to love and understanding, he changed his mind. The day my dad defended Thomas from an ignorant comment from a stranger at the park was one of the most emotional of my life. My grandson is autistic, he said with pride. And he's the smartest kid I know. At school, Thomas was always full of surprises. In subjects that interested him, his performance was extraordinary. In math, especially geometry, he solved problems that even impressed the teacher. But in other areas, like reading comprehension or physical education, the difficulties were evident. This generated constant frustration. How could a child be so brilliant in one area and have so many difficulties in another? I learned that this uneven profile of abilities is common in autism. Thomas's brain works like a high-performance engine that's fantastic on some terrains and needs adaptations on others. We worked with the school to create personalized strategies. In physical education, for example, we discovered he did better in individual activities than team sports. Swimming became his passion. The pressure of the water, the repetition of movements, the predictability of the activity were perfect for him. In English, we learned he understood factual texts better than highly subjective texts. Adapting activities to include more informational texts and less interpretive literature made a huge difference in his performance. I need to be honest. Having an autistic child tested our marriage in ways we never imagined. In the first years after diagnosis, Sarah and I were constantly stressed, tired, sometimes with different views about therapies and approaches. I tended to be more impatient, wanting quick results. Sarah was more intuitive, more emotionally connected to Thomas's needs. This generated constant conflicts about strategies and priorities. There was a time when we were more like work colleagues, taking care of a complex project than husband and wife. Our conversations revolved only around Thomas's therapies, progress, setbacks. We lost the intimacy, lightness, complicity that brought us together. The low point was one night when we argued about an occupational therapist strategy. Sarah thought we should implement it immediately. I wanted to wait another week to see results from the current approach. The argument escalated to things that had nothing to do with Thomas. Old issues, accumulated resentments. In the end, we were silent, each on our side of the bed, and I realized we were losing our family trying to save our son. That's when we decided to do couples therapy. The psychologists helped us understand that caring for Thomas required a strong partnership between us, but that we also needed to take care of our relationship. We instituted a rule. Once a week, we had a date just for us, without talking about therapies or development. It was hard at first. It seemed like we had nothing else in common besides Thomas. But gradually, we rediscovered other facets of each other. I remembered why I fell in love with Sarah, her sensitivity, her ability to see beauty where I only saw problems. She rediscovered my determination, my ability to reinvent myself when necessary. Today, our marriage is stronger than before the diagnosis. We went through a storm together and came out more united. And Thomas greatly benefits from having parents who love and respect each other. As Thomas grew up, his unique abilities became more evident. Besides his extraordinary memory for maps and his passion for dinosaurs, we discovered he has impressive mathematical ability. At 8 years old, he calculated mental operations that I needed a calculator for. Not mechanically, but understanding patterns and numerical relationships in a way that left me speechless. One day, we were at Whole Foods, and I was calculating which cookie package had the best value. Thomas, who was distracted looking at product colors, suddenly said, "Daddy, the blue package. It's 23 cents more per ounce, but it has the cookies you like." He had done all the calculation mentally, without me even realizing he was paying attention. His observation skills are also incredible. He notices details that completely escape me. Small changes in the environment, patterns in things, inconsistencies in stories we tell. It's like he has a superpower for detecting nuances. This made me reflect on intelligence. For a long time, I measured Thomas's intelligence by conventional standards: vocabulary, social skills, traditional learning ease. But he showed me there are forms of intelligence that standardized tests can't even measure. The social question was always my biggest concern. As a father, I wanted Thomas to have friends, to be accepted, to not feel alone. But I learned that friendship for him has a different meaning than I imagined. Thomas doesn't need many friends. He needs true friends who accept him as he is. And fortunately, he found some. The first was Jacob, a classmate who also likes dinosaurs. They don't talk much, but they play side by side, each in his own world, but in harmony. Jacob's mom told me once, "My son has learned so much about patience and kindness from Thomas." Then came Emma, a girl from class who's good at math. They partner up in various school activities, and she intuitively understands how to communicate with him clearly and directly. What moves me most is seeing how these children don't see Thomas as different in a negative way. For them, he's just Thomas, the boy who knows everything about dinosaurs, who's good at math, who likes to organize things, who sometimes needs alone time. One of my biggest fears was that Thomas would grow up without confidence in himself, always dependent on others. I wavered between overprotecting him and pushing him too hard into uncomfortable situations. The psychologist taught me about the importance of creating gradual success situations. Instead of exposing Thomas to big challenges all at once, break everything into smaller steps where he could have consistent successes. When he was learning to tie his shoes, for example, we first practiced with giant shoelaces on a wooden board. Then, with shoes too big for his foot. Only then did we move to his shoes. Each stage was mastered before moving to the next. This approach worked for various skills: brushing teeth, bathing alone, making a simple sandwich. The secret was finding his rhythm and respecting that timing. Today, at 9 years old, Thomas has specific tasks at home for which he's responsible. He organizes his study desk, takes care of the plants in his room, and is responsible for separating his clothes for washing. These are achievements that might go unnoticed by other parents, but for us, they represent enormous milestones of independence. Now, at 9 years old, Thomas is entering a new phase, and I'm preparing for new challenges. Puberty and adolescence bring issues we haven't faced yet. Greater social pressure, hormonal changes, identity questions. We've already started talking about the changes that will come to his body, always clearly and objectively as he likes. We're preparing strategies to deal with the increased social complexity of school, where the nuances of adolescent relationships can be even more challenging for him. But I'm confident. These 7 years taught me that each phase brings its challenges, but also its unique joys. Thomas taught me to be patient, observant, creative in problem solving, and mainly to celebrate achievements I wouldn't have even considered achievements before. Today, I understand that Thomas's autism isn't something that needs to be cured or fixed. It's a different way of existing in the world, with its difficulties, but also with its extraordinary capacities. The world would be poorer without people like Thomas. His unique way of seeing things, his brutal honesty, his ability to find patterns where others see chaos, his genuine kindness. All of this enriches our family and our community. This doesn't mean romanticizing the difficulties. There are still hard days, unexpected meltdowns, frustrations. But I learn that these difficulties don't define who he is. They're just aspects of a complex and fascinating person. If I could go back in time and give advice to the father I was on diagnosis day, I would say, first, breathe. The diagnosis didn't change who your child is. It just gave a name to characteristics that already existed. Your child is still the same person you love. Second, trust your intuition as a father, but also be open to learning. You know your child better than any specialist, but specialists know autism better than you. The combination of both types of knowledge is powerful. Third, celebrate small victories. In a journey where progress is sometimes almost imperceptible, learning to recognize and celebrate each small advance is fundamental for maintaining hope and motivation. Fourth, take care of yourself and your relationship. A functional family is the foundation of everything. If you're not well, you won't be able to help your child in the best way. Fifth, connect with other parents. The journey can be lonely, but you're not alone. Support groups, specialized social networks, in-person meetings, any form of connection with those who understand what you're going through is precious. Today, Thomas is a 9-year-old child who loves math, collects interesting rocks, can count to 1,000 in 3 languages, and asks the deepest questions about the universe I've ever heard in my life. He still needs support in some areas. Transitions continue to be challenging. Crowds still overwhelm him, and he still has his specific routine that we need to respect. But he's also independent in many things, has his own well-formed opinions, and develops his own strategies for dealing with difficult situations. Last week, he surprised me again. We were watching a documentary about space when he said, "Daddy, I think when I grow up, I want to study the stars." I asked why. Because they stay in the same place, but they're also always moving, like me. This ability he has to make these poetic and profound connections never stops impressing me. It's like he sees layers of reality that are invisible to me. The journey with Thomas changed our entire family in ways that go far beyond adapting to autism. We became more patient with each other, more observant, more creative in problem solving. Sarah developed incredible sensitivity to special needs and is specializing in inclusive education. I learned to value different forms of intelligence and success. Our Connecticut home became a place where differences are celebrated, not just tolerated. Even our relationship with extended family changed. Grandparents, uncles, and cousins learned about autism, developed their own strategies for interacting with Thomas, and today are a fundamental part of our support network. At family gatherings, Thomas has his quiet corner for when he needs a break, but he also participates in his own way. He's responsible for choosing the background music, always classical, and organizing board games by complexity level. When I think about Thomas's future, I no longer have those rigid expectations I had before. I don't know if he'll pursue an academic career, if he'll work with numbers, if he'll live independently, if he'll start a family. But I know he'll find his path in his own way, in his own time. My role as a father is to continue offering support, opportunities, and unconditional love while he discovers who he wants to be. One thing I'm sure of, the world needs people like Thomas. His unique way of thinking, his honesty, his ability to see beauty in details others ignore. All of this is a gift for those lucky enough to live with him. If someone had told me 7 years ago that I would be grateful for my son's autism, I would have thought they were crazy. But today, strangely, I am grateful. I'm not grateful for the difficulties he faces, for the moments of suffering, for the limitations the world imposes on him. But I'm deeply grateful for the transformation journey I lived alongside him. Thomas taught me about patience in a way no self-help book could. He taught me about unconditional love in a way no theory could explain. He taught me to see beauty in details, to value small achievements, to question conventional definitions of success and happiness. He made me a better man, a better father, a more empathetic and understanding human being. And not just me. I see this in everyone who lives closely with him. One of the most important things I learned is that raising an autistic child requires an entire village, but a well-informed and committed village. Our network today includes the therapeutic team that has followed Thomas for years, the teachers at Riverside Elementary who specialized in understanding his needs, family friends who learned about autism, neighbors in our Connecticut neighborhood who know that sometimes he needs a calmer environment. But it also includes other parents we met on this journey. The WhatsApp group we have became a lifeline. We exchange experiences, tips, venting, celebrations. There's something very powerful about talking to someone who really understands what you're going through. Once a month, we organize in-person meetings between families at the local community center. The children play together, each in their own way, and we parents talk, laugh, sometimes cry, but always strengthen each other. My definition of paternal pride has completely changed. Today, I'm proud when Thomas manages to clearly express a need. I'm proud when he shows empathy in his unique way, like when he brought a glass of water to Sarah after noticing she was crying. I'm proud when he overcomes a sensory fear, like when he finally managed to use the hairdryer without being bothered by the noise. I'm proud of his authenticity. In a world full of social masks, this brutal honesty of his is refreshing and inspiring. I'm proud of his ability to find joy in simple things. Seeing him happy, watching raindrops sliding down the window, or listening to his favorite classical music for the 100th time, reminds me how simple and pure happiness can be. I won't lie, I still have fears about the future. Fear of how he'll handle the growing social pressure of adolescence. Fear of bullying. Fear of him feeling alone or misunderstood. Fear of not being able to protect him from all the world's cruelties. But I learned that fear is normal. All parents have fears about their children's future. And the best way to deal with these fears is to focus on what I can control, continuing to offer love, support, opportunities for growth, and self-discovery. We're starting to talk about identity, about what it means to be autistic, about how This is part of who he is, but doesn't define him completely. We want him to grow up proud of who he is, aware of his special needs, but also confident in his abilities. This journey also transformed me into a defender of neurodiversity. I participate in awareness groups in the Hartford region, talk to other schools about inclusion, help other parents who are at the beginning of this journey. I realized that every time I tell our story, every time I normalize the conversation about autism, I'm contributing to a more inclusive world for Thomas and all other neurodivergent children. At work, I implemented more inclusive policies in the company. We hired neurodivergent people, adapted work environments, changed selection processes, and we discovered that neurodiversity brought innovation and valuable perspectives to our team. Thomas doesn't know yet, but he's already changing the world just by existing and being who he is. Every person who meets him leaves with a different understanding about autism and neurodiversity. Thomas taught me to value moments that would have gone unnoticed before, like the comfortable silence while we put puzzles together, like his concentration when he's absorbed in an activity he loves, like the genuine satisfaction he feels when he manages to explain something complex in a way I can understand. I learned that connection doesn't need constant words. Sometimes the best way to be with Thomas is simply to be present, available without agenda, without expectations. One of our favorite activities is walking in Elizabeth Park in West Hartford without a specific destination. He stops to watch ants working, to listen to different bird sounds, to feel textures of tree bark. I learned to slow down and keep up with this contemplative pace. These walks gave me a different perspective on time and urgency. In a society that's always rushing, Thomas reminds me there's value in going slow, in observing, in processing before reacting. When I think about the father I was before diagnosis and the father I am today, I see two different people. The father before was more rigid, more impatient, more worried about results than processes. Today's father learned that each child has their own developmental timeline, that forcing achievements before the right time can be more harmful than beneficial, that listening is more important than talking, that presence is more valuable than presence. I also became more vulnerable. Before, I thought being a father meant having all the answers. Now I know it's okay not to know. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to cry when I need to cry. Thomas gave me permission to be human, to have limitations, to make mistakes and learn. And ironically, this made me a stronger and more confident father. Our journey also naturally filtered our social relationships. Some people distanced themselves, not out of malice, but for not knowing how to deal with the situation. Others got closer, showing sensitivity and support I didn't expect. I discovered who my true friends are. Those who ask about Thomas with genuine interest, who educate themselves about autism, who include him in activities naturally. My brother Michael, for example, who was always somewhat distant, became one of Thomas's biggest supporters. He learned about his nephew's special interests and always brings new books about dinosaurs or antique maps when he comes from Boston to visit us. The connection between them is beautiful to see. On the other hand, some old friends simply disappeared when they realized our conversations now included topics like therapies and atypical development. It hurt at first, but I understood this was natural. Different people for different phases of life. One of the most important things I learned was to celebrate Thomas's individuality instead of trying to mold him to fit external patterns. He has his specific rituals that, instead of discouraging, I learned to respect and even incorporate into our family routine. His way of organizing toys isn't compulsion. It's his method of creating predictability and comfort in his environment. His intense interests aren't obsessions to be limited. They're windows into how his brilliant mind works. His need for routine isn't rigidity. It's his way of feeling safe and able to focus on learning and growing. Today, when Thomas lines up his toy cars by color and size, I see a child creating order and beauty. When he spends an hour watching water drip from a faucet, I see someone who notices details and patterns that escape most of us. When he asks the same question 5 times, I see someone making sure he truly understands before moving forward. This celebration of his individuality extended to how our entire family operates. We learned that there are many ways to show love, to have fun, to connect. Thomas's way isn't wrong, it's just different. And often, it's more genuine and meaningful than conventional ways. As I finish writing this story, Thomas is in his room, carefully organizing his rock collection while listening to Mozart. Every few minutes, he calls out to share a discovery. The way light reflects off a piece of quartz, or how two stones have similar patterns. These moments remind me that our journey isn't about fixing Thomas or making him fit into a neurotypical world. It's about building a world that has space for all kinds of minds, all kinds of beauty, all kinds of genius. The father I was 7 years ago was so focused on what Thomas could undo that I almost missed seeing everything he could do. Today, I know that his autism is something that happened to our family. It is something that transformed our family into something more compassionate, more aware, more authentically loving. If you're a parent at the beginning of this journey, know that it's not easy. There will be hard days, moments of doubt, times when you feel completely lost. But there will also be moments of pure magic, discoveries that take your breath away, and love deeper than you ever imagined possible. Your child doesn't need to be seen, understood, and loved exactly as they are. And in learning to do that, you might just discover that you're the one who gets transformed. The journey continues, and I'm excited to see who Thomas becomes as he grows into himself. But I already know he'll be exactly who he's supposed to be, uniquely, authentically, perfectly Thomas. And if you are also on this journey, as a mother, father, caregiver, teacher, or professional, know that you are not alone. Share your experience, comment down below, and join our community. Like this video, turn on the notification bell, and share it with anyone who needs to hear that autism is not the end, but a path of discoveries and love. Because when we share our stories, we help to transform the reality of many families. Together, we can change the world for every Thomas that exists out there.